The history of warfare is often written in the loud, violent strokes of artillery and the frantic screams of the dying. But the true turning points, the moments where the universe holds its breath, are almost always silent. They are comprised of invisible waves, electrical impulses, and the quiet, crushing weight of human decision-making in a dimly lit room. On the northern tip of Oahu, amidst the volcanic rock and the dense scrub brush of Opana Point, the morning of December 7th, 1941, did not begin with fire. It began with a hum. It began with the rhythmic, mechanical rotation of a massive wire mesh antenna, the SCR-270 Mobile Long-Range Radar, sweeping the Pacific horizon like a blind man reaching out into the dark. We often tell the story of Pearl Harbor as a surprise attack, a sudden thunderclap from a clear blue sky. But that is a comforting lie we tell ourselves to excuse our lack of vigilance. The attack was not a surprise to the electrons. It was not a surprise to the cathode ray tubes, glowing with a sickly green luminescence inside a cramped mobile oscilloscope truck. The signal was there. The warning was absolute. The failure was not in the machine, but in the mind. To understand the magnitude of what happened at 7:02 a.m., we have to strip away the hindsight that 80 years of history has provided. We have to place ourselves inside the sweaty, humid confines of that radar truck with two privates, Joseph Lockard and George Elliott. They were not seasoned veterans of a long war. They were young men, barely out of their teens, operating technology that was so new it was practically experimental. Radar was a secret. It was magic. It was a radio wave thrown against the curvature of the earth, waiting for an echo. And on that morning, the echo was deafening. Lockard, an army private with a sharp jawline and the focused, tired eyes of a man at the end of a long shift, was the senior operator. Beside him was Private George Elliott, stockier, newer to the game, tasked with plotting the data and maintaining the logbook. The time was supposed to be 7 a.m. Their shift was over. The breakfast truck was due to pick them up and take them back down the winding dirt road to civilization. The rest of the island was waking up to a lazy Sunday. Sailors were sleeping off Saturday night hangovers on the decks of the Arizona and the Oklahoma. But the breakfast truck was late. A mundane delay, a flat tire, a slow driver. History hinges on such trivialities. Because the truck was late, Lockard decided to keep the radar set running. He wanted to give Elliott a little more practice time on the oscilloscope. It was a casual decision, a moment of mentorship in the quiet dawn. At 7:02 a.m., Elliott looked at the scope and saw something that defied the physics of their daily routine. Usually, a plane appeared as a small trembling spike on the green line. A bird might be a flicker. A formation of planes might be a slightly wider bump. But what appeared on the screen at 7:02 a.m. was a pillar. It was a massive, solidified spike of interference that nearly swallowed the display. Lockard, initially dismissive, assumed the machine was broken. He thought the calibration was off, that the gain was turned up too high, that they were picking up a reflection from the surrounding mountains. He ran the diagnostics. The machine was functioning perfectly. This was not a glitch. This was a reflection of solid matter, massive amounts of it, moving toward them from 3 degrees east of north at a distance of 137 miles. Do the math. Lockard did. He stared at that spike, and his stomach must have tightened, a primal reaction to seeing a ghost. He had never seen a blip that big. Nobody had. Based on the size of the distortion, it wasn't one plane or 10. It was more than 50, maybe 100. It was an armada. The silence in the truck was broken only by the hum of the cooling fans. Elliot, looking at the logbook, knew they had to call it in. But here is where the bureaucracy of peace intersects with the urgency of war. The chain of command was not built for speed, it was built for verification. The phone line from Opana Point to the information center at Fort Shafter was a fragile copper wire strung through the jungle. Elliot cranked the phone. At the other end, at Fort Shafter, the scene was one of Sunday morning lethargy. The information center was the brain that was supposed to process the eyes of the radar, but the brain was asleep. The plotters, the officers, the tactical crew, they had all gone to breakfast at 7 a.m. The only people left in the massive room with its plotting table and map of the Pacific were a switchboard operator named Joseph McDonald and a young lieutenant named Kermit Tyler. Tyler was a pursuit pilot, not a radar specialist. He was there for training, observing the operation for the second time in his life. He was the only officer on the floor. When the phone rang, McDonald answered. Elliot, breathless, reported the massive blip. McDonald, sensing the panic in the private's voice, wrote down the message. He turned to Lieutenant Tyler. And this is the moment. This is the fulcrum upon which the fate of the Pacific Fleet rested. Tyler listened to the report. He processed the data, a large formation of planes coming from the north. His mind, searching for a logical, non-threatening explanation, landed on a piece of trivia he had heard earlier. A flight of B-17 flying fortresses was scheduled to arrive from the mainland that morning. They were coming from the north. They were a large formation. It fit. The logic was sound, provided you ignored the fact that the B-17s were coming from a slightly different angle, and there were only 12 of them, not enough to create the massive spike Lockhart was seeing. But confirmation bias is a powerful sedative. Tyler looked at McDonald and said the words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Don't worry about it. Those 4 words traveled back down the copper wire, up the mountain to the truck at Opana Point. Lockhart and Elliot were stunned. They watched the blip get closer. 7:15 a.m., 90 miles. 7:25 a.m., 50 miles. The spike grew larger, more distinct. They were tracking their own destruction in real time, forbidden from sounding the alarm because an officer miles away had decided it was just a scheduled delivery of bombers. The psychological isolation of those 2 men in that truck is difficult to comprehend. They were holding the truth in their hands, watching the geometric proof of an invasion, and they were told to ignore it. The blip eventually merged with the permanent echo of the coastline and vanished into the dead zone caused by the island's geography. The planes were overhead. At 7:55 a.m., Lockhart and Elliot finally shut down the radar. The truck had arrived. They stepped out into the bright Hawaiian sun, stretching their legs, completely unaware that the swarm they had tracked was currently dropping armor-piercing bombs on the battleships lined up in the harbor. As they drove down the mountain road, the sky to the south began to fill with black smoke. They thought it was burning brush, perhaps sugarcane fields being cleared. It wasn't until they reached the base that the reality hit them. The strafing runs, the explosions, the chaos. The blip was real. The warning was ignored. The tragedy of Opana Point is not just about a missed signal. It is a case study in the failure of systems. We build technology to see farther, to hear deeper, to warn us of danger, but we cannot engineer away the human tendency to normalize the abnormal. Tyler wasn't a villain. He was a man operating within a context where war was a theoretical possibility, not an immediate reality. He filtered the data through the lens of peace. He interpreted the anomaly as the familiar. This is the danger of the normalcy bias. When faced with data that suggests a catastrophe, our brains scramble to find a benign explanation. We rationalize the smoke as steam. We rationalize the gunshot as a firecracker. We rationalize the radar signature of the entire Japanese Imperial Navy Air Wing as 12 American bombers. In the aftermath, the investigation was brutal. Lockard and Elliott